G'day guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we are here to predict every single game of the AFL season. That is right. So of course, if you don't know, a website called squiggle.com.au release a well thought out AFL ladder predictor every single year, and I thought today would be a great time to do something a little bit fun, predict every single game. Of course, it's not anything too serious, but might as well do this now while it's updated. So if you guys want to go and predict every single game of the AFL season, maybe see where your team may finish at the conclusion of the 2026 season, then make sure to go check that out. I'll leave a link down below. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. So of course, this is the website right here. It starts with opening round, and you can get, it's a pretty well thought out website, really. You can pick the margin for every single game on this little scale here, and the person who is running this, great job to them. Make sure to go show them some support by going on the website. And we'll start with, of course, the first game of opening round, the Charlie Curnow revenge match, and I'm going to pick the Swans in this one by about 10 points. Then you got the Gold Coast up against Geelong, a very underrated game, this one. Both teams going to be big this season. Going to go the Gold Coast, I think, by 20 points. GWS Hawthorn, of course, the rematch of the elimination final from the 2025 season. I think that we see GWS get some revenge, so I'll pick the Giants. And then the final game of opening round, we have Brisbane up against the Dogs. I think I'll pick Brisbane. I think they will get off their campaign to a great start, trying to go for 3 in a row. Oh, sorry, of course, we do have the last game of opening round because we have a 5th game now in Victoria. What a wank. But anyway, St Kilda up against Collingwood because, you know, Collingwood shouldn't be allowed to travel an extra game, you know. Bit tough for them to get up and play their first game in New South Wales. Oh, I feel sorry for Collingwood having to leave the MCG. But of course, this year they've got so lucky that they get to go back there and play their opening game of the season against St Kilda, and I'll pick Collingwood in this one. So now we get finally to the first round of the season. A traditional game, Blues up against Richmond. Last year, of course, Richmond caused a massive upset. I can't see them doing that again. I'm going to pick the Blues. Essendon up against Hawthorn. Of course, the Zach Merritt game. I'm going to pick Hawthorn by a bit, but I can't really see Essendon doing very much. Of course, with a couple of injury concerns. It's going to be interesting to see how Essendon go next year with Zach Merritt. He has resigned as the captain. Interesting to see who gets that job. Dogs up against GWS. The Bulldogs done really well last year at Marvel, so I'm going to pick the Dogs. Cats up against Fremantle at Cardinia Park. I'm going to have to pick Geelong. Sydney up against Brisbane at the SCG. That's an interesting game. I'm going to pick Sydney just because I think Brisbane will have a couple of losses at the start of the season because they had a little bit of a delayed start to pre-season. Collingwood up against Adelaide. These games are always pretty close. Collingwood have a pretty good record up against the Crows, so I'm going to go Collingwood. North Melbourne up against Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide, I think, are going to have a pretty good draw this year, so I wouldn't be too surprised if they have a pretty strong season. I'll go with Port Adelaide by about 14 points. Melbourne up against St Kilda. Obviously, Naz in the corresponding fixture last year with a great final quarter to get his team over the line. I'll go with St Kilda. Gold Coast win that one. And round 2, Hawthorn up against Sydney. Well, I'm thinking Hawthorn are going to have a pretty good year, so I'm going to pick the Hawks. Adelaide win that one at home. This will be an interesting game at the MCG for the Gold Coast. I think they'll win this game, though. GWS up against St Kilda. Go for the Giants. Fremantle up against Melbourne. Thinking Perth. Freo should win that. Adelaide Oval for Port Adelaide. They win that one comfortably. Do West Coast finally get their season up and going, or do we expect North? I think we go with North. I think their season's gonna. I think they're going to start to have a good season. I don't think they make finals, but we'll wait and see. Cats win that one. And poor Collingwood. Round 3, they have to go to Marvel Stadium. I feel so sorry for them. I'll pick the Giants in this game, actually. And then round 3, St Kilda up against Brisbane at Marvel Stadium. Like I said, I think Brisbane are going to have a bit of a slow start to the season. So I'll pick St Kilda. Freo win that one. This will be an interesting game. I'm actually going to pick North Melbourne in this fixture. I think that North are going to have a pretty good start to the season. Port Adelaide beat West Coast Eagles. Carlton up against Melbourne. Interesting game, this one. I'll go with the Blues. Now, Collingwood have been pretty good up against Brisbane at the Gabba in previous years. I'll go with Collingwood in a 20-point win. North Melbourne against Carlton. These games. North Melbourne always seem to not show up, so I'll go with the Blues. Crows should win that one at home. And then this will be a close game, this one. I'll go with Port Adelaide just. Sydney will beat West Coast in Perth. They've had a pretty good record there. I like the Gold Coast here. This is an interesting one with Christian Petrarca, of course. Dogs up against Essendon. I'll pick the Dogs very comfortably. This will be a good game. Finally, we're going to see some entertainment on Easter Monday. The last few years, this game hasn't been a really big spectacle, but I think we're finally starting to get back into Hawthorn golden days. So, good on some aspects, not great on the others. I'll go with Geelong by a couple. Crows, first game of Gather Round. They win that one. Collingwood up against Fremantle at Adelaide Oval. I'll pick the Pies. So shocking that Brisbane have to go play in the Barossa, but they'll win this one comfortably. This will be an interesting game. Melbourne up against Essendon. I'll go with Melbourne. Sydney up against Gold Coast. This is going to be a very interesting game. I'll go with the Swans by a goal. Hawthorn up against the Dogs. Hawthorn have a good record, or have a better record, I think, than the Western Bulldogs. Cats win this one comfortably. I think the Giants win that one. And the finish gather round, we've got Port Adelaide up against St Kilda. I think the Power win that. So now we get to round 6. We'll do one more round and then we'll look at the ladder for the first time. Collingwood win that one pretty comfortably. Geelong, I think they win that against the Dogs. First Sydney Derby. I think the Swans will respond after last year's disappointment. Gold Coast will win that one very well. Hawthorn up against Port Adelaide. I think the Hawks win that well at Marvel. Crows will smash the Saints. North Melbourne up against Richmond. I think we see North win that game just. I see the Lions starting the season up and going now. Freo win the Derby. And then that's pretty much it for the first 6 rounds. So let's take a look at the ladder for the first time. So looking at the predicted ladder after 6 rounds of the season, we have got the Cats, the Gold Coast, Collingwood, Port Adelaide, and Sydney, all 5-1. So Port Adelaide looking to get off to a red-hot start this season with a better fixture. We have the Crows up next in 6th spot with Hawthorn and the Giants on 4-2. And then outside the 8 at the moment, in the wildcard spots, we've got Brisbane in 9th, Fremantle in 10th, Carlton are in 11th, and North Melbourne are in 12th, all with 3-3. The Dogs and St Kilda sitting in 13th and 14th with 2-4. The Demons with 1-5 in 15th. And then down the bottom at the moment, we've got the Tigers, the Bombers, and the West Coast Eagles. So right now, West Coast, I think it's going to be a pretty tough year for them. Essendon as well. Maybe we'll see a little bit of a drop-off from Richmond after pretty much, I would say, overachieving last year, but we'll have to wait and see. So we'll get back to the games now. Round 7, Bulldogs up against Sydney. I'll go with the Dogs at home. Richmond up against Melbourne. Interesting game, this. I'll go... Actually, you know what? I may go Richmond here. Tassie, Hawthorn, I think they win that. Anzac Day, Collingwood will win. Adelaide Oval, Port Adelaide against the Cats. I feel like the Cats will win this. The Cats have a pretty good record at Adelaide Oval in recent times. Perth Stadium, Freo should win that one comfortably. I think St Kilda respond, get a good win there. Brisbane at the Gabba. Even though they didn't play well at the Gabba last year, I'll go with the Lions. Giants up against North Melbourne. Go with GWS. Collingwood up against Hawthorn. This will be a very interesting game, this one. It's going to be tough. I'll go with Hawthorn. Bulldogs up against Fremantle at home. Again. This will be an interesting game. I'll go with Freo just. Showdown, I'll go with the Crows. Essendon up against Brisbane. I'll go with the Lions. Perth Stadium. Tigers, I think, they won this game last year. I'll give West Coast this win. Down at Kardinia Park. Geelong win this one by 100. Can I get to 100? You bet I can. I'm going to give it an even 100. Carlton up against St Kilda. Docklands Stadium. I'll go with the Saints by 5. Sydney should win that one against the Demons. So, Expansion Cup. Can the Gold Coast finally break through? I think they do. I'll give the Gold Coast that win. Perth Stadium for Fremantle. Hawthorn, not exactly the worst team in Perth, but I'll give it to Freo. Gabba, Carlton, I think the Lions win that. At Adelaide Oval, the Dogs, I don't mind them here, but I'll go Port Adelaide by a couple of points. North Melbourne against Sydney, I'll go with the Swans by a goal. GWS against Essendon, I feel like the Giants win that one pretty well. And then we got the Gold Coast up against St Kilda. I think the Gold Coast can have a very good year up at home. Geelong should win that one against the Pies. Melbourne up against West Coast at the MCG. You think the Demons win that one. Crows won this game last year after showing some doubters about their MCG sort of woes, so I'll give them that one. So Geelong versus Brisbane up at the Gabba. I like the Lions, the grand final replay. Maybe Geelong look for revenge though. Interesting game. I'll pick the Lions just. Sydney up against Collingwood at the SCG. Interesting. Last year the Pies got a good win against the Swans early in the season. So that was at Adelaide Oval though. So haven't played there in a while, Collingwood. I'll give them the win just. Gold Coast at home, win that one. Adelaide Oval, the Crows win that one very comfortably. Melbourne up against Hawthorn at the MCG. I'll go the Hawks. I think the Dogs win this one. At the MCG for Fremantle. I feel like it'll be closer than what some people expect, but I still see the Dockers winning. St Kilda up against Richmond. I'll go with the Sainers. Perth Stadium won't matter for the Giants. They win that one well. Down in Tassie for Adelaide. I like Hawthorn here. It is a Hawthorn win. And then Richmond up against Essendon. So Dreamtime at the G. I'll give it to Essendon, but it'll be close. Perth Stadium, Freo up against St Kilda. I'll go with Freo at Perth. North Melbourne up against the Gold Coast Suns. This is in Docklands. I'll give a close win to the Gold Coast, Union Park. Sydney don't have a bad record down in Geelong and have won there in previous times. They haven't played there in a few years. I'll give it to Geelong though. MCG for Collingwood. They beat West Coast comfortably. Adelaide Oval, Carlton sucked there, so I'll give it to Port Adelaide. So GWS, I feel like Brisbane can win this game. I'll give the Lions that win. Dogs are up against Melbourne in Docklands. They win that one well. And then round 12, we've got St Kilda up against Hawthorn. Ooh, and in Docklands, very interesting game in Marvel Stadium. I'll give that to St Kilda. Carlton up against Geelong. Carlton have actually beaten Geelong in recent times, have a good record against them. So I'll actually give this one as an upset. Sydney at the SCG should win that one against them. Lions up against Fremantle at the Gabba. Yeah, I'll give it to Brisbane. Dogs up against Collingwood at Marvel Stadium. I'll give that one to the Dogs. This is in the NTs. I don't know how many times the Giants have played up in the NT, so I'll give that one to Melbourne. Bit of an upset. Perth Stadium, Essendon up against... Oh, this is going to be an interesting game. So I think Essendon actually won this game just last year, but it was one of their last wins before the end of the season. So I'll give it to Essendon just. That is the end of round 12, so let's take a look at the ladder once again. So with a couple of teams having buys and not so just yet, it is a little bit skewed, this ladder, but of course at the end of round 13 we have the Cats up the top with 9 wins along with the Gold Coast Suns who have a game in hand. Brisbane sitting in third spot at 9 and 3. Then we go down the ladder a bit. We've got Collingwood, Hawthorn, Fremantle and the Swans with 8 wins, 4 losses, sitting from between 4th and 7th. In 8th spot we have the Crows at 7 and 4 along with Port Adelaide in 9th spot with 7 and 4. So that'll be an interesting wildcard game between both of them. Then the Giants are in 10th spot. After that we get to the Dogs in 11th. St Kilda are in 12th, both with 6 and 6. Carlton dropped down a little bit with 4 and 8. Melbourne are 3 and 9. North Melbourne are 3 and 8. Then we've got the Bombers getting a few wins, moving to 16th with 2 wins and 10 losses. Then we've got the Tigers and the West Coast Eagles locked on the bottom of the ladder with 1 win and 11 losses. So let's get to the second half of the season. So now we get to round 13. The Crows up against Geelong. This will be a good game at Adelaide Oval. I'll give this one to the Crows just. Then we move to the MCG. I'll give that one to Hawthorn. This is in WA. Interesting game. I think they played this game last year against West Coast, but North Melbourne haven't been too bad in WA in recent times, but I'll give this one to Fremantle. The Q Clash. Brisbane have been very good at these, but I'm going to give it to the Gold Coast at their home ground. Port Adelaide should win this game. Sydney up against St Kilda. St Kilda have been okay against the Swans, but more at Marvel Stadium, so I'll give this one to Sydney. Essendon up against Carlton. I feel like the Blues get a win here. Then we get to the Big Freeze game. Collingwood up against Melbourne. Collingwood should win. Docklands Stadium. Dogs up against Adelaide. I feel like the Dogs win that at home. Cardinia Park for Geelong. They should win that. Melbourne up against Essendon at the MCG. I'll give Essendon a sneaky win. North Melbourne up against West Coast at Perth Stadium. I'm going to give this one to the Roos. Adelaide Oval. Port Adelaide against the Swans. Sydney won this one last year. I was at this game, but I'm going to give this one... Oh, this is going to be interesting. Swans don't have the best record at Adelaide Oval against the Power. I'll give this one to the Power. This is in Tasmania, this game. Tigers up against the Lions. Brisbane famously drew this game against North Melbourne last season. So, do I give them a bit of an upset here, the Tigers? No, I can't do that. No way. No way. Sorry, I shouldn't have thought of that. Sorry, Tigers fans. Docklands Stadium, St Kilda up against the Giants. I like GWS, but Yeah, I'll give him a win here. Oh, do I? Yeah, I'll give him a win. Fremantle up against Geelong at Perth Stadium. I'll give that one to the Dockers. Gold Coast up against Hawthorn in Gold Coast. You give that one to the Suns. Crows up against Melbourne. Easy win. Sydney Giants up against Carlton in New South Wales. I'll give this one to GWS. Collingwood should win that one comfortably. Tigers against North Melbourne at the MCG. I'll give that one to the Roos, actually. St Kilda up against the Dogs at Docklands. Ooh, this is going to be a very interesting game. Interesting to see how the Saints go next year. I'll give it to St Kilda. Gabba. Swans won this game last season, but didn't really matter for the Lions. They still wanted to win the premiership. I'll give this one to Brisbane. Carlton up against the West Coast Eagles at Docklands Stadium. That's not going to matter. Collingwood should beat the Tigers. Hawthorn at the MCG. Giants haven't been bad at the MCG, but I still think Hawthorn. North Melbourne up against Essendon at Docklands Stadium. I'll give this one to the Roos. Second showdown. You know what? I'm going to give Port Adelaide this game because I think they've lost about 6 showdowns in a row or something between both the AFLW and the AFL side. I think also the Sandful or something. I'll give this one to Port Adelaide. I think they'll finally break the drought. Freo up against the Gold Coast in Perth. Freo. Essendon up against St Kilda, the Docklands Stadium. Yes. Cool. Brisbane did win this game last season and broke a bit of a drought. I'm going to kind of give this one to the Lions. Gold Coast up against Collingwood. Despite Collingwood catching back in that last quarter last year or last season, I'll pick the Suns. Giants. Freo did get a big win this game, I think. Yeah, that's when they kind of turned their season around. So I'll give this one to Freo. This is down in Tassie, so this will be Hawthorn all day. MCG, Carlton up against Richmond. This will be getting towards the end of the season, so I wouldn't be too surprised if Richmond sneak a win at the end of the campaign. Maybe I'll give them this one, actually. Sydney up against the Dogs. I feel like Sydney are going to drop a game or two at the SCG next season, so I'll give it to the Dogs. Adelaide Oval. Maybe North Melbourne get a win here. No, I don't feel that confident. I'll give that one to Port Adelaide. West Coast up against Adelaide. This is definitely the Crows by about 30 or so. Brisbane against Essendon. So we're getting pretty close to the final look at the ladder before we move to the final parts of the season. I'll give this one to Brisbane comfortably. Carlton up against Hawthorn at the MCG. I'll give this one to the Hawks. Collingwood against North Melbourne. North Melbourne have been okay at these games against the Pies at Docklands Stadium, but I haven't been able to knock them off. I'm actually going to give them this win. It's a bit of an upset. GWS against Geelong. Oh, they're not playing it down in Cardinia Park. That would have been really good for GWS. They would have loved that. They love it down there. So I'll give this one to the Giants, though. Melbourne up against Richmond at the MCG. I'll give this one to Richmond. I think they'll get a couple of wins late in the year. St Kilda up against Port Adelaide at Docklands. I'll give this one to St Kilda. Dogs win that one comfortably. Crows at home will win. And Sydney have actually played well in Perth, so I'm actually going to give this one to the Swans. And that is the conclusion of round 18. So let's take a look at the ladder predictor at the end of round 18 before we get into the final games of the regular season. So looking at the ladder at the conclusion of round 18, we have the Lions up the top with 13 wins, 4 losses. And we've got the Gold Coast Suns, so 2 of the Queensland teams up the top with 12 and 5 for Gold Coast, along with Hawthorn and Fremantle at 12 and 5. We've got Collingwood, Adelaide and Port Adelaide sitting with 11 wins and 6 losses. Geelong sitting in 8th spot with 10 and 7, along with the Giants and Sydney. And then getting outside of the wildcard spots, we've got the Dogs in 11th, St Kilda in 12th, North Melbourne in 13th with 7 wins and 10 losses. Carlton are in 14th with 6 wins and 11 losses. And then we move into the bottom 4 with Melbourne with only 3 wins, along with Richmond and Essendon. And then rounding out the ladder, we have the West Coast Eagles with just the 1 win. But I think they are definitely moving in the right direction, the Eagles. But now let's move into the final few rounds before we get to the finals. So Collingwood up against Carlton, first game of round 19 at this stage. We don't really know at this point, but do we? But anyway, we'll get to Collingwood. I think they win that one. GWS should win that game at Docklands. Geelong will win that one comfortably. Gold Coast up against the Dogs. On the Gold Coast, I feel like the Suns win that. Melbourne, I think, have to get a win somewhere, but I'm going to pick the Roos. At the MCG, I think Hawthorn win that one pretty well. Sydney against the Crows. The Swans lost this game in last season by 90 points. I feel like they kind of respond. I don't think they let that happen again, so I'll pick Sydney here. Port Adelaide up against Fremantle. Interesting game at the Adelaide Oval. Now, Freo did win this game last season, but Port Adelaide had a huge chance to win it. I think the Dockers will get that one. West Coast up against Brisbane at Perth Stadium. I don't think that's going to matter. Brisbane will win that all day. Moving to round 20, Brisbane up against Port Adelaide at the Gabba. Yeah, I think Brisbane get that done. Dockland Stadium, that helps the Suns, I think. Then the Giants, I think I'll give them this Sydney Smash, whatever the hell they call it these days. What, the Battle of the Bridge? God, I hate that name. Hawthorn up against Essendon. I'll pick the Hawks. North Melbourne up against St Kilda at Docklands. I'll pick St Kilda. Geelong will win that. Dogs should win that one pretty well. Crows up against Collingwood. I'll pick the Crows in that one. Freo should win that one pretty comfortably. I like the Lions here. Pick them. Geelong up against Collingwood. Geelong have a good record against the Pies. I'm gonna pick Geelong. Then the Crows will win that one very well. Gold Coast should beat the Demons. Hawthorn up against North Melbourne down in Tassie. Hawthorn win that one all day. Richmond against West Coast at the MCG. I feel like the Tigers get that one done. St Kilda up against Sydney at the Docklands. Sydney did win this game last year. With finals on the line, I think I'll pick the Swans. Port Adelaide up against GWS at Adelaide Oval. I feel like that's going to be a very close game. I'll pick the Giants in a close one. Freo should win that one. At the Gabba, Hawthorn. I feel like they get a bit of an upset, Hawthorn. I don't know why. I feel like they do, though. I'll pick the Hawks. Cats win that one all day. GWS up against Gold Coast. I did pick the Gold Coast in the last expansion cup, so I'll pick the Giants in this one. Melbourne up against Fremantle. At the MCG, you kind of feel like there's an upset brewing at the end of the campaign for the Dockers, so I'll pick Melbourne there. St Kilda up against Carlton. I'll pick the Saints. Sydney up against Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide don't really have any fears of playing the Swans at the SCG, so do I pick the Power? I'll pick the Swans. Dogs up against North Melbourne at Marvel Stadium. I feel like the Dogs get that one. Crows up against Richmond at Adelaide Oval. Crows. Then the Pies win that one comfortably. Lions up against the Gold Coast. This is going to be a very interesting Q clash. Probably fighting for one of the top spots on the ladder. Go with Brisbane. Essendon up against Sydney. The MCG. Yes, I'll go the Swans. Giants win that one very well. Hawthorn up against Collingwood. I'll pick a very close game. I'll pick... Maybe I should pick a draw. I'll pick this one as a draw. I'll pick one draw for the season. At the moment, anyway. North Melbourne, Geelong in that. And then Richmond up against St Kilda. I like St Kilda here. The MCG, even though they don't play that well there. I'll pick them just. Dogs will win that one. Port Adelaide should win that against the Demons. Fremantle, I like them in Perth, so they should win that. So now we get to round 24, the final round of the season. So I think we should take a look at the ladder before we predict the last 9 games of the season. So looking at the ladder right now, it does look like Brisbane have all but certainly locked in that top spot with 17 and 5. So after a bit of shaky start to the season, they're doing pretty well. Hawthorn are in second with that draw that I just gave them. Fremantle are in third. Geelong have jumped right up the ladder from, I think it was 8th, about 5 rounds ago, into 4th spot. Sitting there with the Gold Coast and the Giants on 15 and 7. The Crows and the Swans rounding out the top 8 with 14 and 8. Collingwood sitting in 9th spot, so currently in a wild card spot at this moment. And the Dogs are dangling onto that 10th spot right now with Port Adelaide right on their hammer, along with St Kilda, who are still trying to get a wild card spot at the end of the season. And then going down the list, we have North Melbourne in 13th, Carlton in 14th, Melbourne in 15th, Richmond 16th, Essendon 17th, and then rounding out the ladder, we have the West Coast Eagles. So let's get into the final games of the season. So first game we have here is Collingwood up against Brisbane at the MCG. I feel like Brisbane may rest some players here if it was this sort of circumstances, so I'll go with Collingwood. Carlton up against Fremantle. Carlton don't really have much to play for. Freo have a lot to play for, trying to get a higher spot for finals. I'll go with Freo. Port Adelaide should win this game up against Essendon, I would say. Geelong should smash Richmond in my eyes. Then Melbourne up against the Dogs. I'll give this one to the Western Bulldogs. St Kilda up against the Gold Coast. Both teams fighting for a lot of finals here. I'll go with St Kilda in a tight one. Sydney up against North Melbourne. I feel like the Swans win that one pretty well. Crows up against the Giants. So both of them fighting for a better spot in finals. Out of the Adelaide Oval, the Crows win that. Hawthorn up against West Coast. Doesn't really matter. And that is the final ladder for 2026. So we do say that Hawthorn jump into top spot with that draw. Brisbane are in second, Freo third, Geelong fourth, Crows are in fifth, Gold Coast drop down to sixth, GWS are in seventh in the first wildcard spot, Sydney are in eighth in the second wildcard spot for the home teams. So 2 wildcard games are in New South Wales. Collingwood are in ninth, Dogs are in 10th, and Port Adelaide have missed out on percentage Carthage in 11th, St Kilda are in 12th, North Melbourne 13th, Carlton 14th, Melbourne 15th, Richmond 16th, and then Essendon finishing down in second to last with the Eagles only one win again, finishing in 18th. So with that being said, I think we just have to scroll down here. We do, and we can go through the 2026 10 final system. Of course, for the first time, we will have a wildcard round. So GWS will host the Western Bulldogs in the wildcard spot here. I will pick the Giants. I think they'll get there. So the Giants will go through, and in the other corresponding fixture, I am going to pick... it's going to be tough. I'll go with Collingwood. I think I'm going to go with the Pies. I think the Swans will scrape into finals and then lose. So we'll go with that. So the finals move now to the final 8 teams. This is where the actual finals begins. I don't care what Andrew Dillon says. If Essendon were to make this fixture and win, it does not matter. You don't win a final until you get to the qualifying and elimination finals. But let's get to it. So Hawthorn up against Geelong in the first qualifying final. Geelong seem to win these games, so I'm going to pick the Cats. Crows up against the Pies. Pies won this game in the qualifying final last year, so I'm going to go with the Crows to respond. Gold Coast up against GWS. I think, the Giants have lost their last few finals, so they may want to look to respond here, but I'm going to pick the Gold Coast. And then Brisbane up against Fremantle at the Gabba. They should win that. So then we get to the first semi-final. Hawthorn up against Adelaide at the, this will be at the MCG, so I will pick Hawthorn. Then Fremantle up against the Gold Coast Suns. Last year, of course, Gold Coast made a bit of an upset, and we always do see a team usually go out in straight sets. So, do I pick it here? I think I do. I'm going to pick Gold Coast to make the prelim final up against Geelong. So, moving to the prelim finals now, we get to Geelong up against the Gold Coast and Brisbane up against Hawthorn. So, Geelong up against the Gold Coast Suns. I'm actually going to pick an upset here. I'm going to pick the Gold Coast because I think the Geelong have failed a lot of big finals like this, and I feel like the Gold Coast are ready to jump into a grand final. And Brisbane up against Hawthorn, this is going to be a massive game. And I feel like Brisbane get there. I feel like they do. I know it may be a bit strange, but I think it's going to be an all-Queensland grand final. Looking at these predictions, and the Premier for 2026, I see the Lions going back to back to back. So at this moment in time, I am saying Brisbane go 3-peat for the Lions. I think they are the hardest team going into it. I think when finals come, they just always find a way to win. And overall, I think Brisbane are the team to beat going into 2026. Now, guys, of course, this is just a bit of fun. I'll probably do a predictor more like this towards maybe February or March, maybe a couple of weeks before the season. But I thought today would be a nice little idea video just to, have a little bit of fun. If you guys want to do this sort of predictor, make sure to click the link down below. The person who puts this together every single year, Max Barry, of course, with the Squiggle website, does such a great job. So make sure to go show him some support. Make sure to do your ladder predictor. Make sure to let me know down below what you guys think as well. But that is all from me. So make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Make sure to check us out on Instagram as well, as we're making new graphics for the channel over there with all our predictions and stuff going into next season. So make sure to check that out. Make sure to like and subscribe. But for now, catch us all on the next one.